Absinthe is quite the famous alcohol. Today we're looking at its story. It's a history of controversy, art, defamation, and a murderous Swiss farmer. But without any further ado, let's get into it. So absinthe starts in the late 18th century in Switzerland. It was concocted by a French doctor named Pierre Ordinaire. It was his aim to create a medicinal elixir by blending botanical ingredients together. The most notable ones being fennel, anise, and Grand's wormwood. The Latin name for this herb, Artemisia absinthium, actually giving it its name. These would be fused with alcohol in order to make like a potent tonic that was meant to have healing qualities. The recipe got passed along and ended up in the hands of a distillery that started producing the absinthe in larger quantities. Absinthe's popularity grew steadily through the 1840s, during which time it was given to French troops as a malaria preventative. So the returning troops, when they came back, they had quite the taste for it. So it ended up becoming so popular in France that 5 p.m. was known as the Green Hour. It was a class-wide favourite, essentially, with ordinary working class people to the wealthy bourgeoisie enjoying it, with notable absinthe drinkers being those such as Ernest Hemingway, Lewis Carroll, the author of Alice's Adventure into Wonderland, and Arthur Rimbaud. The drink started to become associated with violent crimes and social disorders, with a bunch of smear campaigns taking place to ruin the image of the popular green spirit. It's believed that these were orchestrated by the wine industry to recoup some of the market that they've lost over the years from the popular alcohol. Edgar Degas painted a canvas displaying the view of absinthe addicts as sodden and benumbed, and Émile Zola described its effects in his novel L'Assommoir. Absinthe was blamed for Van Gogh's ear-lopping incident, and for filling asylums with people that had gone insane by drinking it. Most notoriously as well, in 1905, a Swiss peasant farm labourer called Jean Lefray, whilst in a drunken rage, shot and killed his pregnant wife and his 2 daughters, as apparently or allegedly a direct consequence of drinking absinthe. The fact that he was a habitual drunk and that very day had consumed litres of wine and a good deal of brandy, whilst only having 2 glasses of absinthe, was apparently not considered to have any bearings at all on his action, and it was completely the purpose of the 2 glasses of absinthe. Studies were conducted by a scientist called Dr. Valentin Magnan. He forced lab animals to consume pure wormwood oil extract and used resulting violent convulsions, he observed, as evidence for his theories. The modern-day equivalent of this would be if scientists fed a load of animals pure caffeine, watched the results, saw animals die, and then go, you shouldn't be drinking tea or coffee because it contains this substance. He even asserted that the damage caused by absinthe was hereditary and could be passed on to one's children. A syndrome was created to describe the effects of overconsumption of absinthe, rightly called absinthism, apparently characterized by addiction, hyper-excitability, and hallucinations. Some of the bad rap that absinthe got was possibly due to unethical manufacturers adding cheap and often poisonous ingredients, such as copper sulfate for colouring, and antimony trichloride to enhance the looshing effect, something we'll touch on later on. With the approach of the Second World War, and with a call to action from other countries such as Belgium, Switzerland, and the Republic of Congo, France decided to ban the alcohol in 1914. This ban led to an increase in the popularity of pastis, an anise flavoured spirit that contains additional flavour of licorice root. While the two are compared as being quite similar, there are actually quite a few differences in between them. Pastis tends to get its flavour from star anise, the Asian spice, while absinthe uses green anise and fennel, which are more Mediterranean herbs. Pastis tend to be bottled at lower percentages, like 40 to 50%, and can contain added sugar, whereas absinthe cannot contain any added sugar and is more of a dry spirit and can reach percentages anywhere from 45 to 74%. So after the ban, absinthe stayed out of the public eye for several decades, until a man called George Rowley went to work in Prague for his insurance job, where he first experienced Czech beer and absinthe, where it had never been banned. He decided to sell Czech absinthe in the UK, in another place where it had never been banned, as it wasn't really that popular. And that ended up becoming the catalyst for its revival. And officially in France, the ban got repealed in May 2011 after petitions from the French Spirit Federation. Now, most countries don't have a legal definition for absinthe, whilst other alcohols such as whiskey, brandy, gin are globally defined and regulated. There's a liberty for distilleries to label a product name as absinthe without any legal definition of quality standards. There are two historically defined processes to create the spirit that most legitimate distilleries use to tie their standards to. These two methods being distillation and cold mixing. In Switzerland, the only country with a legal definition for absinthe, by the way, distillation is the only permitted method of production. So, cold mixed absinthe is more of a modern method of production. It tends to be cheaper and regarded as inferior to the distillation method. It consists of blending of flavouring essences and artificial flavours in cheap alcohol. The lack of the formal legal definition in most countries to regulate the production and quality of absinthe has made it very easy to make cheap products that can be pawned off as traditional, either in composition or in production. The proper method of producing is through distillation, which the process is very much akin to that of high quality gin. So, distilleries mix fresh herbs into pure alcohol and let it sit and macerate a while, before being distilled one or more times, usually in a copper pot still. The reason they distill it after this is to remove more of the bitter flavours that end up coming from the wormwood plant. Ground wormwood, that is. The ground wormwood's macerated, and then they add small... Ground wormwoods, is it petit? I don't know. They add the big one in the beginning, and then after distillation, they put in the small one. Anyway. Those extra distillations result in a colourless alcohol, which sits at about 70%. So this is usually either referred to as La Blanche or La Bleue absinthe. And this type of absinthe was often produced by home distillers while it was kind of going through a ban period, because it was just easier to hide from the authorities. Come to think of it, I don't actually know any other green spirits. So if it's green, it's probably going to give away. If it's alcohol and it's green, it's probably going to give away its absinthe. If it's clear, you can probably get away with it. Now, traditional absinthes do not use artificial colouring for their green colour. They instead go through a second maceration process. So if anybody doesn't know what macerating is, essentially imagine infusing. That's all it is. It's infusing, but the macerating is just to detail the fact that they've been ground down and made into smaller pieces so there's bigger surface area. So yeah, infusing, macerating, very, very similar. Anyway, they go through a second maceration process. So they steep plants such as petite wormwood, hyssop, I butchered that, but HYSSOP, and melissa, amongst others in the alcohol. So chlorophyll from these herbs are extracted in the second process, giving the drink its iconic bright green colour. This step also adds a herbal complexity that is typical in high quality absinthe, and the fact that the chlorophyll remains chemically active during aging helps develop texture in the drink. Imagine almost like tannins in wine. Once aging is completed, it tends to be diluted then bottled. Nowadays, modern absinthe are made with neutral alcohol, despite traditional absinthe being made with more of a white grape spirit, or what is known in France as an eau de vie. Now you know all about it and how it's made, I want to actually tell you how it's actually drunk. So the most typical way to drink it involves placing a sugar cube on top of like a specially made slotted spoon known as an absinthe spoon. And you put that spoon on top of the glass, and the glass has a shot of absinthe in it. So ice water is poured or dripped over the sugar cube to mix the water into the absinthe. And the finished drink contains about 1 part absinthe and about 3 to 5 parts water. They actually made special glasses for absinthe, but they have like a little curved bumpy bit at the bottom where you can have your measure, and then like a slightly outer funneled bit, so therefore you'd have enough space to put your spoon onto. As the drink gets diluted, it goes from a green clear spirit to a cloudy white drink, which is described as the louche. So components in the drink are soluble in the high alcohol levels, but when the ethanol percentage lowers to below 30% ABV, the components come out of the solution and they become insoluble, and that's what creates this louche effect. Similar things are found in pastis and most aniseed-based drinks. Think raki, ouzo, all those type of similar ones. Potentially sambuca as well. Don't hold me to that though. The release of these dissolved essences in the drink create like the perfuming of the herbal aromas and flavors that brings out subtleties in it that would be lost if you were just drinking the spirit neat. Now, how they used to serve it back before it got banned in like the 1900s was you would get this cool little water dispenser that was filled with ice water, and you'd have like 2 taps, and what would happen is you'd have your glasses come out with a shot of absinthe, and you'd have your sugar, and you'd have your spoon, and you'd have this massive water thing, and you could control how fast, how slow you wanted the water to come out, and how much water you wanted to come out. But your choice of whether you wanted to put sugar in, whether you didn't. Kind of like how when people bring you coffee nowadays, they bring you with the sugar, and you could decide whether to put it in or whether not. But while it's going through this process of slowly tripping over the sugar cube to go into your absinthe, you could have a discussion, you could wait while your drinks are being made, and you just sit there and wait for your drink to be made. I don't know why, but that and the idea of being in a French cafe sitting outside with you having a chat while this drip water just slowly fills up your glass with absinthe. I don't know, just a really French image in my mind. Now, there is another method called the Bohemian method that tends to be frowned upon by most experienced absinthe drinkers. This method is where you soak a sugar cube in absinthe, and then you set the cube on fire, and you let it drop into the glass where your shot of absinthe is. And yeah, this usually ignites the absinthe in the glass. Then you get a shot of water, and you throw it in to extinguish the flames. This method usually results in a stronger drink, mainly just because of the fact you're putting less water in it, and tends to cook the absinthe. So more of the nuanced flavors are lost. One interesting thing I came across while I was researching this episode was how if the absinthe is naturally colored and exposed to light or air for a prolonged time, then the chlorophyll will naturally just degrade as it becomes oxidized. And so it will change its color from green to yellow and then eventually to brown. So if you buy a vintage bottle of absinthe, they'll come out as like an amber color rather than green due to the slow oxidation. So in order to preserve the green color of the absinthe, naturally colored absinthes have to have like special dark light resistant bottles, and then have to be stored in like a room temperature place they have to have like special dark light resistant bottles, and then have to be stored in like a room temperature dry place away from light and heat. I don't know why, but you never really think that you have to look after spirit bottles as much. I know in the whiskey world that there is like bottles that are really old that are really, really well looked after, but you wouldn't think that the deterioration of a natural ingredient inside a spirit would be something that you'd have to think about. And it doesn't affect the flavour at all, it literally just affects the colour, which I thought was something that was very interesting. I wanted to touch on as well that the whole myth of people saying that you hallucinate when you drink absinthe. So I got told this because I went on a distillery tour when I was like 16 in France from what was the distillery called? Combier Distillery, to turns out they actually produced Lucid Absinthe, which was I think it was the first absinthe to get an export license to the US from when it's been banned. But since then, US absinthes have come out. So, but they ended up telling me that I got this one thing stuck in my mind, that when they distilled it with wormwood, there was a molecule that made people hallucinate, and that they've now found a way with modern science to genetically remove it or get rid of this molecule that makes you hallucinate. And so now absinthe is fine, whereas before it wasn't. Throughout all of my research, I could not find a single thing relating to it. So I don't think that's true at all, and I think this guy just made up on this distillery tool, but it stuck with me. There were loads of people saying that, I think it was Van Gogh, who said that when he left a bar after drinking absinthe, he felt like there were tulips brushing past his legs, and there was all this like negative connotations about you going psycho from drinking absinthe, that hallucinations were just a typical thing that was strung along with it. But more recently, the most active, I say active ingredient, the chemical inside ground wormwood is called thojone, Thujone. There was some research because they thought it looked really structurally similar to THC, the active chemical in cannabis. And so they thought it could bind to the same receptors as THC. And so they thought that because it could bind to the same perceptions, and then there was loads of like psychoactive bits with THC, that was the reason for why you would hallucinate with absinthe. Although it was completely disproved in a paper in 1999. And I wanted to talk more about, like, dismiss any potential controversy that comes out about absinthe and thojone, because technically thojone does cause convulsions in high doses. But hold on, right? So EU standards permit a max thojone level of 35 milligrams per kilo in alcoholic beverages, which is really weird when they should be doing it by litres. Anyway, in alcoholic beverages where ground wormwood is listed as an ingredient, and 10 milligrams per kg in other alcoholic beverages. A study published in the Journal of Studies on Alcohol concluded that high doses, 0.28 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, had negative effects on attention performance in a clinical setting. And the negative things they had, it was a delay to reaction times and limiting a field of vision. It was temporary though. It wasn't like a permanent thing. It was just, if they had a little bit too much of it, then they had slightly slower reaction times and like their field of vision, they had to focus more on the center of it. So for the average Frenchman, I've got to use Frenchman because, you know, absinthe being a French spirit and all. The average Frenchman weighs 77 kilos. So this works out as like a high dose of thojone being 21.56 milligrams of thojone. And then if we work off the maximum allowance, which bearing in mind not every absinthe is going to have the absolute max allowance, in the EU guidelines, this man would have to drink 600 millilitres of pure absinthe at an average percentage of about 60% in order for any impact of the thojone to be detected in a lab setting. So essentially, you have to drink nearly a whole bottle of absinthe by yourself if you're an average Frenchman, which I'm sure most of you are, in order to have any slight effect at all from the actual chemical itself. So now you've had a little bit of a look over the history of absinthe, how it's made, all of the processes, all of that. Enjoy it if you decide to get some. Ultimately, it is still an aniseed-based drink. If you don't like aniseed-based drinks, then you're not going to like it. So I think a lot of people drink it for the gimmick. I feel like it's really bad if I describe it as a sambuca and take all the sugar out, and then mix in a load of herbs into it, and then make it more alcoholic. So like nothing like sambuca. Anyway, go to a bar that stocks it. Try some. See if you like it. Worst comes to worst, you know. You don't drink it. Or try something that has this louche effect in it. All that kind of brand of like aniseed flavored drinks are really, really popular in Europe. So if you're not a fan of them, they're all fairly similar. They will have similar-ish flavor profiles with differences in between them and slight differences in processes. But yeah, try raki if you go to Turkey. Try Pernod pastis if you go to France. Try absinthe if you get a try, because you probably won't. Well, actually, I don't want to say that. I was going to say you probably won't end up shooting and killing your pregnant wife and 2 daughters as a direct consequence of it. But you never know. 2 glasses could do it for you. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye bye.